A Case for America. I am Austin Hepworth, and I'm here along with Michael Hepworth. We are discussing the topic of respect for religion and its role in the American fabric, the American legal system, the American culture. Essentially, we come from the place, when we talk about America, that liberty, or a state of freedom, is a state of high prosperity. That when we're a free people and doing the right thing, that we prosper, we do well. And we're not talking just financially, we're talking spiritually, emotionally, and just in very many factors or facets of life. Today, we see in America, there's a lot of, say, problems. We obviously still have a lot of money, and we're still doing well economically for the most part. But there is skyrocketing rates of depression, anxiety, other issues. And while there's many, many causes for those, not pretending that there's any just one cause, there is something to explore in morality, faith, this liberty balance, and it's tied to the overall human wellness that exists in our country. And so if we look at the founding fathers and kind of the premise of America, we've said a few times on this podcast that the Constitution says in it that it's the supreme law of the land. But in actuality, even the Constitution is based on and appeal to higher laws. And often in court cases, we haven't gone through this in as much detail, but often in court cases, judges will look to what some of these higher principles may be. They say if the government has a compelling interest, it can justify restricting constitutional freedoms, for example. And so the what the courts are doing here is they're looking to say, does this constitutional protection in this scenario fit within this bigger moral framework that we exist within? The Constitution, when it was created, the founders felt they had the moral right to appeal to these principles to create a government. They felt there was actually a moral right to do so. The fact they felt there was a moral right means that they also felt there were things the government shouldn't do. So they talked about inalienable rights. They talked about these things that should still belong to the people. But then again, it left us in this place of, as a society, deciding how these play out. We know that not all of the moral basis at the time were in line with the morality of our day. Slavery, for example, was still allowed under the Constitution, and Black people weren't seen as fully equal. That was something that changed over time. There was a Civil War. There were future amendments to the Constitution. But when we look at some of the traditions that have carried through some of the frameworks, religion is one of the first and foremost. It's in the First Amendment. And the founders, if you think about the history of it, many of the colonies in America existed because there were different religions involved. One religion would come over, they were being persecuted, they'd leave their land, and they would flee to America or come to America, migrate here, whatever conditions they were under. And they would form in different locations. And you'd have communities that were Puritans or Catholics or different places, and they didn't necessarily get along super well. Sometimes they traded with each other, but they were still fairly independent for the most part. To overthrow Britain and regain the freedoms and liberties that they wanted at the time, they had to find a way to work together. And to keep the country alive after the revolution, they still had to find a shared morality, a shared basis or foundation to stay together. And so one of the major ones, again, was religion, where they said, hey, we're going to respect the way that you believe, because they looked at each other and they realized this will never work if we're going to tell each other how to believe. America's simply too diverse, even at the time that it began. It was far too diverse to get everyone on the same page for a religious morality. So they went a little bit deeper and said, well, we may not all believe the same things about God, but we're going to agree that the government's not going to tell us what to believe. We have that freedom for ourselves. And so as we look at that, and think about, well, why is that important? Um, what starts to happen with belief? Because even in America today, a lot of people don't believe that they have a religion. There's people that feel that they're agnostic or they don't believe in God. Um, and when we talk about religious freedom and respect for religion, we're really talking about almost a freedom of conscience. And there's a quote from David Saperstein. He was a U.S. ambassador. And he said, at the core of religious freedom is freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience is a foundation for freedom of speech, freedom of protest, and freedom of the press. I would add in that freedom of conscience is the basis for how we act, for how we choose to live our lives. And that freedom of religion protects this freedom of conscience to the extent that it starts to create actions and beliefs which really matter to us or that impact our lives. Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, said that we believe that nations are stronger and the lives of their people richer when citizens have the freedom to choose, proclaim, and exercise their religious identity. We've also learned that the denial of religious freedom or threats to it can cause fear, flight, fighting, and even all-out war. And if you think about this, we live in this really interesting situation on this earth. We have this, we have a couple facts before us, you could say, that I think most people agree are facts. Maybe there's some that would disagree, but we're born. At birth, it feels like it's something new. We celebrate it. There's life suddenly when there wasn't before. We live, all of us are experiencing something. And then we've seen and experienced death, meaning we watched other people die. They're no longer alive. The question of where life comes from still isn't answered by science. Science will talk about evolution. It'll talk about all kinds of things. But what really is the life force? What it is that really brings life to something versus a rock that sits there? We don't really fully know yet. And it's a question all of us have to deal with. And so from that perspective, questions then arise. Well, is there something deeper than the human? Is there a soul? Is there a spirit? Some people will believe yes, some will believe no. But then questions also arise. Well, did my spirit or soul exist before birth? Does it stay alive after death? And these are, again, just questions that create this scenario where all humans have to then decide what this life is, what it means. We're here, we're in these bodies, we're living, we look around us, and we have no way of knowing currently if we were alive before, if we're alive after, if there's some piece of us that continues on or not. People have experiences, people see things, people believe things. But at the end of the day, to my knowledge, there's not a conclusive scientific answer. I believe that maybe science says we die, but I don't think science can disprove that if spirit exists. All that we can say is science can't detect it, essentially. So in this scenario, those questions alone frame an incredible amount of how we decide to live our life and the morality that we then base it off of. For some people, if they believe that there's a heaven or a hell after this life, their actions in this world start to really matter. And they start to form beliefs and systems. And to the Secretary of State's point, if you take away someone's ability to exercise their religion and they believe it's going to consign them to a hell or some type of damnation later, it can lead to war. You can lose peace over regulating someone's beliefs. Because if they've adopted the view that there's more to life than just this life and just this existence, then there are deep problems that can come in. And as the founding fathers experienced, being told what to believe, what church to join, was not an ideal place for anyone to be. It caused intense frustration, there was war, there were different things that went on. And so then, to maintain peace, to maintain prosperity, to maintain liberty, America has this moral tradition that let's respect the religion of others. And let's do what we can to be a society where there's many people together with the agreement that we may not all agree, but we're going to respect it. And that is, to us, one of the strong moral traditions of America that make it so our country works if we can have this respect for belief. Michael, I'm curious if you have additional comments, quotes, or other things to add to that.
Yeah, continuing down that kind of philosophical road, we can even go beyond your belief about an existence before this one or an existence after this one. People, when they talk about actions taken by another individual, will use words like good, bad, right, wrong, just, unjust. And we need to do a better job of asking what we are referencing when we say that. Somebody can say they don't have a religious belief, but then they will claim that somebody taking something from them, it was wrong or it was unjust. What is that definition based on? How do you decide right and wrong, just, unjust? And it comes down to what you're discussing. It comes down to a belief in something beyond yourself, something that transcends humanity, or else it wouldn't apply to everyone. If it was just good and bad for you, then you can make whatever decision you want that you felt was for you. If that definition of good and bad didn't transcend you to apply to other people, then whatever you felt or deemed necessary for yourself is the action you could take, and it doesn't matter what the outcome is for somebody else. But in general, we feel that there is a good, a bad, a just, and an unjust that applies, that transcends our humanity. It applies to everyone around us. And so when we talk about supporting religion, we need to talk about that piece right there. What is it that you believe in? Even if you don't define that as a belief in God or a supernatural or something, where do these ideas of right and wrong, just and unjust come from? And how do we continue to maintain them? There was a lot of concern on those lines by the founding fathers. How do we maintain? They like to refer to the right and wrong, just and unjust as the mores of society. There's that famous quote by John Adams where he talks about this Constitution being made for a moral and religious people. But there's kind of more to that quote I'm going to bring out here really quick. He wrote this to some members of the militia in Massachusetts. He talked about the country it's remaining intact and things are going well. But he said, how does he start this? Should the people of America once become capable of that deep simulation towards one another and towards foreign nations, and this is where he describes what that simulation is, which assumes the language of justice and moderation while it is practicing iniquity and extravagance, and displays in the most captivating manner the charming pictures of candor, frankness, and sincerity while it is rioting in rapine and insolence, this country will be the most miserable habitation in the world, because we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, and revenge or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. And then he continues with, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So it's the mores of our society that strengthen the Constitution. It's our ability to bridle avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry with our societal mores that allow the Constitution to be strong and successful. As he says, if without those societal mores, then the Constitution would break as a whale goes through a net. So, regardless of how you're defining what your belief is, what are those mores in our society? What are those values that we hold? And how do we keep them strong if we don't allow a freedom of religion, if we don't allow individuals the freedom of conscience? So part of keeping our Constitution strong is making sure that we strengthen the mores of our society with the freedom of religion.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to look at it. I think about when you talked about kind of this, this collective morality, and some people believe they just have a morality for themselves. One of the things that the law is that it's a reflection of at least majority view in most cases of what is right or proper for everybody. So the view that thou shalt not murder and hey, I can't go out and kill someone, we've decided as a society it's moral to say we're not going to go kill people in general. Now, some people may argue, hey, we'd actually be better off if we just eliminated some of these people from our society. Maybe there's some credit to that. If we had gotten rid of Hitler earlier, we talk about, there's people today that talk about, hey, let's just identify all the psychopaths and shut them up before they kill or injure anybody. Society may have less killings if we did something like that, but then we'd be taking on the role and the morality of determining who's free, who's not free, who lives and dies as well. And these are some of the things that historically we've opted to say, we're just going to agree right now that we shouldn't go out and just selectively eliminate people from society. Thou shalt not kill is one that, for the most part, is pretty well accepted. It's being challenged on some things like euthanasia. And there's some areas where people are trying to make some roads there, but I don't see any big societal movement that's going to make it so it's legal to just go kill your neighbor because you don't like them. And again, that's a very strong moral code we've accepted as a society, and the law reflects that. The law reflects certain morals that we say, yeah, if this is going to work, everyone needs to follow this. And to your point, I think the founders were very strong in saying, if this is going to work, we need to have deep respect for the freedom of religion. And so it's been interesting watching in recent society, there's been a big push to get religion out of the public square. They say religion shouldn't be involved in politics. Get it out of here. I don't want churches, telling people what they can or can't do. We see this a lot in the abortion debate, where people say your religion shouldn't be able to tell a woman what they do with their bodies. And I go back to, well, let's just go back a little bit. Moral-wise, we believe we can tell people not to kill. If you take the abortion case to the extreme a little and say just the day before a baby's due, it's perfectly developed, everything is ready to go, it can feel pain, it can hear you, its brain's functioning, its heart's functioning, it looks just like a human. The only difference is it's inside a mother. At that point, what makes it so that the thou shalt not murder laws don't apply to that baby? It's a belief we've formed about when life begins. And yes, there's a baby and there's a woman, but now there's two beings in existence. And at what point can the laws come in to say, yeah, you can't kill that baby anymore. You can't take that baby's life away. These are questions that are very much based in belief. And no matter how much you want to say you don't have belief or you're acting on science or whatever else, it's still a belief-based thing. When does life begin? Science doesn't have an answer for us. These are things that we look at. And so when we say, well, keep religion out of the public square, we're saying essentially, keep out views that are different than mine. Keep out views that may be based in a view of, the spirit or other elements, but just let me go with mine and when I believe life begins. But whether you want to call that a religion or not, because again, people refer to religion as kind of this, they equate it with a belief in God. And so people that don't believe in God, so they don't have a religion. But to us, maybe a different way to say it is we talk about respect for religion, but it's respect for faith or respect for conscience is the real deep underlying thing here, to say you're still acting on faith. You're still acting as a matter of conscience. To you, maybe the right of the woman exceeds the right of the baby inside the woman. But even there's a conflict there if that baby's a girl or a female. Then there's two women. And the one's fully developed, the other's, older. But there's now two rights in conflict. And how we reconcile those are very much a matter of faith, a matter of conscience, a matter of debate and kind of passion. And if we just say, religion, get out of here, we're shutting down an incredible amount of dialogue, an incredible amount of potential learning. Because while we may not agree with every religion, they at least have a basis, some reason to argue and articulate their position on things. And that helps us get closer to the truth that we should be going off of to decide some of these scenarios.
On your point to talking about everybody having belief about something like abortion, we should also point out that everybody has a belief when it comes to science. Science isn't possible without a belief. And we don't like to think about it this way, but the reason the kind of scientific movement got started centuries ago was because individuals believed that there was law and order to the world and the universe around them. If there wasn't a belief that you would find some sort of order, then there's no purpose to do science. If today gravity can work and tomorrow it won't, and there's no reason for it to change, why even bother with science? But we have a belief that there will be consistency and law and order, and so we pursue that with a scientific process. Individuals who like to say that they just listen to a scientific output and they don't live their life off of belief or faith aren't thinking, I think, deeply enough. If you think about, I'm going to take a pill because scientific community said this pill will be good for me, you don't take a chemistry kit to the pharmacy and test to make sure there's no poison in it. Most people don't do that. They take the pill on faith. You're taking the pill on faith that what the pharmacist has given you is the pill you expect it to be. You're taking it on faith that the scientific community that put it together didn't make any mistakes. We make most of our decisions in life based on a faith and a belief, sometimes in other people, sometimes in many people. But we need to do a better job of acknowledging the faith we all live by, whether we say that's a God or whether that's something else. We all live by some sort of belief and some sort of faith. And I think we'd be able to better understand each other if we kind of talked about that in our political discussions, come from the point of view of my belief is or my faith is. And then we can get down to the pieces that inform our political belief. People say religion has no part in politics, but lawmaking is a moral endeavor. You are saying this is a good thing to do, so we're going to make a law. You're justifying it based off of some sort of good or bad, right or wrong. And so if lawmaking is a moral endeavor, then your religious beliefs, your beliefs, whatever they may be, is going to inform your decisions. Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote the book Democracy in America, he said he looked at religion and liberty as working together hand in hand. They needed to be together. He said that religion looks upon civil liberty as a noble exercise of man's faculties, and on the world of politics as a realm intended by the Creator for the application of man's intelligence. Free and powerful in its own sphere and satisfied with the place ascribed to it, religion knows that its empire is more secure when it reigns through its own intrinsic strength and dominates the hearts of men without assistance. Liberty looks upon religion as its comrade in battle and victory, as the cradle of its infancy and divine source of its rights. It regards religion as the safeguard of mores, and mores as the guarantee of law and surety for its own duration. So there's a balance that Tocqueville saw there, that religion knew its place in keeping the mores of society and knew that it was powerful when it dominated without assistance from law. And liberty appreciated religion because religion was the bastion of the mores of society and kept everybody in a similar place as far. And again, when I say religion, I mean a belief. It keeps everybody working towards a common goal. Hey, what do we believe? What do we think is good or bad? And that is upheld by our religious beliefs and not by a law that forces it to be so.
Yeah, those are all really good points. Yeah, it is very interesting to me to, when I talk with people, how many people deny that they live by faith. um, and I think there's some level of identity people form that they follow science or whatnot. But to your point, well, did you test the pill to see if it really has what it says in it? And even I've often been amazed as an attorney. I have a license to practice law, but I don't think a single one of my clients has ever checked. It's pretty easy to verify. You can jump online and say, okay, I just want to make sure you really got a license, Austin. I just say I'm an attorney, and people believe me. And I remember there was a show quite a while ago called The Pretender. It's about just a really intelligent guy that just pretend to be different positions and things. And the one piece I remember from it being out as a kid was this lady's asking him, "Are you a doctor?" And he says, "I am today." And this notion is fascinating when, yeah, there's a ton of faith. Someone talks to me and say, "Oh, I'm an attorney." "Oh, great, you can handle this. I'll hire you. They'll pay me a lot of money," and they don't even check to see if I'm really an attorney or not. And occasionally there are people that get swindled by people that claim to be attorneys and that aren't. And occasionally people get swindled by people that claim to be attorneys and are attorneys too. Both happen. But it's a matter of faith where, yeah, I made the decision. And life is way too short, and there's no way for us to verify everything. We have to trust at some point. But not just trust, we have to form beliefs about all kinds of things. We eventually have to determine which experts we believe more. But even in the expert realm, I've been fascinated. During COVID, there was just this huge, loud voice that kept saying, listen to the experts, trust the experts, stop doing your own thing. And they were really upset at people that didn't fall in line with all the COVID advice coming down from the World Health Organization or from the CDC or their doctor or whatever. And people just kept saying, why are we making this a political issue? Let's just do what's necessary for our health. And it was really interesting because a lot of these people didn't believe in a universal morality. They didn't believe in God, but they believed it was acceptable to forcibly vaccinate everyone. And to me, those two things conflict, going, well, you have a moral basis. Something inside you says it's appropriate to forcibly vaccinate someone that may not want to be, because you believe intrinsically that there's a better good that can come from it, even if some of those people get harmed along the way. But in addition, it goes a little bit deeper because, to your point, Michael, about do we verify everything? When I look at the claim that we should trust the experts, it's a thing of faith. It still is to say, well, if I'm going to trust the experts, I have to believe that they have considered all the factors that are going to say what's best for me. But that highly conflicts with what expertise is in our world. Expertise is I become really good at one thing, and I know that one thing really well. And so if you go to an infectious disease expert and say, hey, we've got COVID spreading around the world, what do? We don't have a vaccination and we don't have a remedy for it. They say, well, the way to stop an infectious disease is stop being together. There's probably truth to that, right? There's probably some truth to, if you stay home, your chance of getting sick goes down a lot. Don't interact with anyone, and your chance of getting sick drastically drops. An infectious disease expert could tell us that. What can't they tell you, though? They can't tell you what happens when you stay at home, what happens to your business, to your job, what happens to your mental health, what happens to your kids' learning progress in school. Every single one of those things requires a very different expert. And so if you're going to ask the question of, well, what's the best thing for me? I'm a dad. I have 8 kids. I need to provide some funds for them. I've got to pay a mortgage. What's the best thing for me? Is the best thing to stay home? My kids are in school. Is the best thing to keep them home? Shut down their chance to learn, to say you got to do remote learning. Is that the best thing for them? For a disease that didn't highly threaten children? The infectious disease expert can't answer that question. They're highly specialized in a very narrow area. And so when someone says trust the experts, I say, well, what experts? Which ones do you want me to trust? Because the economic expert's going to tell me that this economy is really going to hurt when we shut this down. And the child education expert could probably have told me that kids aren't going to do well when we mask up. They're not going to read social cues and facial cues. They're not going to understand a lot of things. They're going to fall behind in schooling. Our system just wasn't prepared for shifting to at home and making parents the teachers and all these things. We're seeing those effects now. The state of California got sued and hit with a huge lawsuits about neglecting the kids during COVID and their education being impacted. It's pretty accepted at this point that there was significant harm to children as a result of shutting down. So again, faith, though, is this thing of saying, well, I believe this infectious disease expert knows what's best for me. That may be a valid basis for faith. It may not. For some, it was valid. For some, it wasn't. As a society, though, we have to tolerate the differences. And if there's people that want to get together during that time because they believe it was best for their health or their children's health, or maybe they had children that were suicidal and needed interaction with people, and they said, you know, the chance of dying from COVID is less than the chance of dying from suicide at this point. I need to do something for these kids. That is where the government is supposed to have this balance to say, we don't tell people everything. We let them go decide what they need to believe, how they believe it, and what they pursue with those things.
Just a quick kind of reinforcement of that. Tocqueville, in his book Democracy in America, said, there is in every constitution, regardless of its nature, a point at which the legislature is obliged to place its faith in the good sense and virtue of its fellow citizens. That point is nearer to hand and more obvious in a republic, and more remote and carefully hidden in a monarchy, but it always exists somewhere. In no country can the law foresee every eventuality, nor should institutions take the place of reason and mores. And so just kind of backing on what you say, we place our faith every day in other things. In a republic, it's near to hand the point that where the legislature needs to place its faith in the citizens and our mores and our reason. And if we haven't done a good job of upkeeping our mores because we've taken down our religious freedom so much, then it makes it that much harder for the legislature to place its trust in its people.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point of if we remove religion, it's harder to place a trust in people. I like that point a lot of, yeah, the legislature absolutely has to some extent, trust that people will do certain things. If they pass a law, there's some expectation that people will follow it generally. And all laws in America still require some level of voluntary compliance. You know, we look at things even with the IRS. And the amazing thing is we have a voluntary reporting system, meaning I have to tell the government what I made each year. And it works decently well. I mean, the IRS recently identified 150,000 people in America that make over $400,000 a year and haven't filed a tax return for 7 or more years. Now they're going to come after them and audit them and presumably try and collect a lot of those back taxes. And so there are people that will skirt the system. But in general, we're saying as a whole, most Americans file their taxes. It's an amazing system because we have a moral code. If we all just, then I'm not going to do it anymore, the government wouldn't have the power to compel all of us to do that. There's just too many of us. And so it does rely on this basis of, well, if we pass a law, people have to listen. They have to govern themselves. They'll go to HR Block or, wherever it is, TurboTax, get their stuff done, get it in. They trust the private market to provide solutions to things. The government will pass some very complex laws, and they trust that the private market will find a way to help people comply. But if there's not a religious institution, there's not an undergirding morality to anything, then the legislature eventually just is saying things, and there's no respect. And if you look at video discussion we did on Marbury versus Madison, it's posted on the website, the YouTube site where there's videos posted. It talks extensively about how the Supreme Court knows that its whole basis of power resides in the respect people give it. The Supreme Court can't enforce any of its commands. It can say, hey, state, you have to do something. It has no power to make anyone do it. And the Supreme Court is one of the most fascinating institutions because everything it says only has effect if people respect it. And this notion of respect, it's one of the great moral strands that ties our whole Constitution together. In the case of Marbury versus Madison was where the Supreme Court gained its respect as an institution. It's held it since that time. It's under attack today quite extensively. But the same notion of respect as a moral basis for America is one of, we have this respect for religion. We've had it for a very long time. And that respect for religion means that we can act in certain ways. We know that certain people will do things in general. There's always an exception. But in general, society exists because when I go drive down the road, I can trust that at most stoplights, when the light goes green, I can proceed through. That works most of the time. And so I go drive. There's deaths every year. There's accidents every year from exceptions to these situations. But I've lived for 40 plus years and been through many, many intersections where that general rule is held fairly consistently. And so this is a trust thing. The light turns red, people stop. It's not necessarily because there's a police officer sitting there, because most lights there's not. It's a moral basis that allows us to function. And the law, like you say, is relying on this moral basis, this respect. And religions, and I listened to a atheist guy talk about how he said 20 years ago, 30 years ago, he went on a crusade to get religion out of the public square. And he said he regrets that now because what he's seeing is that organized religion was a means to carry societal morals, that organized religion could more effectively instill societal morals in people than anything else that existed. The government was woefully inadequate to instill societal morals in any people or group of people. And that as he felt that as organized religion lost respect, that people didn't respect it as much, that politics was becoming uglier, that we start upholding politicians that are very crass or rude, that are breaking down the whole system of respect that existed in the system, and that formed the basis for a lot of how things interacted. When that respect is gone completely, we lose so much of our freedoms, we lose so much of our institutions, we lose so much because so many laws are predicated on that, and so much starts to break down as that respect breaks down. So to us, the point of this discussion is to say, as a people, we shouldn't demand that religion remove itself. We can't demand that. Our system is inextricably tied to it. We have to, instead of saying, get out of here, you're not wanted, which leads to violence, which leads to unrest, which leads to dissatisfaction, which leads to fear, which leads to anger, we have to say, hey, you're welcome to talk here. Just let us know where you're coming from. Share with us your beliefs. Let us know what you believe, why you believe it. Okay, you believe this. I believe that. Let's talk about what we believe and let's figure out how we get to a good spot. Maybe we'll never agree because our beliefs are different. But if we can acknowledge them and respect them, then so much more can exist in our country and so much more can happen. The laws can work and we can be a system that's governed by law and by morality, as opposed to a system that has no respect. People just do whatever they want to do because those morals break down. Michael, I don't know if you have any other thoughts or comments to add before we finish up today.
Yeah, I'll just run back to Tocqueville one more time in his book, Democracy in America. He said, liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. I think we've kind of discussed the reasons there, but we won't be able to fully enshrine liberty without faith and trust. It relies on society, it relies on the people around us. And so we need morality so we can have faith and trust in people. Morality comes about because of faith. Whether it's faith in some supreme being or faith in the goodness of people, whatever it is, you place your faith and trust in something that transcends humanity. If it doesn't transcend you, then there's no reason for you to believe or see it in other people. So that faith has to be something that's bigger than you. It has to go to everybody around you. And so we won't be able to maintain our liberty if we cannot maintain our morality. And our morality is maintained through our institutions and our communities, our religious institutions typically, but it doesn't always have to be under the guise of religion. It can be people getting together to talk about the things that they believe in common, whether it's a worship or just a discussion. But what are those things that we believe in? How do we maintain them if we say that religion has no place in the public sphere, or we can't talk about it in politics? We won't be able to enshrine liberty at that point. Liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith.
Yeah, totally agree. And this is something that, in the end, again, it's not something to feel discouraged about if people feel differently or it's still trying to push it out of the public square. It's to say more, look at it as empowering you to understand that your faith is important and it's appropriate to stand up for it, talk about it, and articulate it. Faith lives through discussion, through words, through action. The things that you say and do matter. If you're not willing to talk about your faith, faith is dying. If you're willing to talk about your faith, it has life. And so long as there are a few people willing to talk about their faith, you can never fully eradicate the basis of faith. And so just talk about it, share it with people, practice doing it in a respectful way. You can respect the views of others. You don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to be crass about it. But you give life to this moral fabric that holds America together when you can speak about your faith, when you can share it, when you can articulate it, when you can defend it, and when you can do so respectfully for others and their beliefs as well. It's one of the great ties that keeps America strong, that keeps it in balance, and that ultimately allows us to thrive and exist as a country. So thanks for joining us today. We appreciate being with you, and we will follow up next week with more conversations about some of the morals that undergird our political system, our legal basis here in America. Thanks so much.